There's a ton of noise out there. So how do you get decision makers to pay attention to your brand? Start a podcast and invite your ideal clients to be guests on your show. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show. Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Michelle Tillis Lederman. She is the CEO and founder of Executive Essentials. She is one of Forbes' top 25 networking experts. She's the author of 4 books, has been featured in the media in a number of outlets lately, including CBS, MSNBC, Wall Street Journal, NPR, and the New York Times. She is also the author of The Connector's Advantage, 7 Mindsets to Grow Your Influence and Impact. Michelle, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Logan.
It is a pleasure to have you on the show. We're going to be talking about, obviously you have a long list of credentials, but we're going to be breaking down some things from your most recent book, The Connector's Advantage. Before we do that, I would love for you to share with listeners a little bit about yourself, your journey to the point you are today in your career, and why you're the person talking about the power of connection.
Sure. Well, one of the things you didn't mention in my bio is that I'm a recovering CPA. I spent about a decade in the finance career. I was the only woman on a trading floor. I was the only woman on a global venture capital team. And I often say I teach all the mistakes I ever made. I was very frustrated in that time, in the communication, in the management. And I would sit across from people. I was doing hedge fund investing for a bank. And people would come in and pitch. And I would think, that's not how you pitch. Like, that's not how you win me over. And I started to realize, I'm like, let me teach you. And so that's actually how Executive Essentials came about. I started to see the need and started to work on people connecting to their message and really understanding how to communicate more effectively. Mm-hmm. But my first book, The 11 Laws of Likability, came about because I wanted to understand the reactions that people gave to each other and the reactions people had to me. I always say I was kind of a polarizing personality. When I was younger, people loved me or hated me, and I didn't know why and what I was doing that made some people love me and made some people hate me. And so that was kind of how that founded that research. And my latest book, The Connector's Advantage, is kind of tacking on to the end of that book. It's taking it to the next step. Networking, which is relationship networking, is what I talk about in the 11 Laws of Likability, is something we do. We go out and we do this thing called networking. But a connector is someone that you are. And what I have found in the evolution of my career and in my research is that people with a connector's mindset, a relationship-based approach to business, to life, they get things done faster, easier, better. Don't mind the bad grammar. Faster, easier, better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you point on an important distinction, or at least an interesting one to me. You know, a lot of folks in the B2B sales and marketing space that listen to this show and people in my network, they don't necessarily like this word networking. I do see as a lot of them can identify themselves as being or wanting to be a connector. Do you think there's something to the way that we see both of those things? Is it that, folks are approaching networking the wrong way, and maybe that kind of informed the why behind this book? Maybe touch on that a bit and then give me your why. I'm kind of assuming some things, but tell us why you felt this topic was so important for folks.
I could not agree with you more about the word networking. It has the word work in it. Who wants to do that? I hate the word. Not that I hate the action. And my first publisher said I had to have the word networking for SEO purposes and for search purposes in my book title. And so I said, what about relationship networking? And for me, it's a paradigm shift in the way we think. Relationship networking is a longer term approach. Plain old networking tends to be networking for now and networking for need. So we want to shift to a long-term approach. We want to shift from talking just about what do you do in business and let's make a deal to what are you interested in? What are you doing this weekend? And let's just connect. Because real relationships, and this is the why behind the what of the book, real relationships lead to real results. When we connect because we want to and we get to, those are the relationships that will sustain us. And those are relationships that it's very easy to build from. Those introductions, those referrals, people are 4 times more likely to buy when referred from a trusted source. Yeah, so when you're talking about sales and marketing, it's all about that customer loyalty and creating those raving fans. And you do that by creating relationships with your customers. And the valuations follow this. So I get so excited by this. But if you look at things like Netflix and LinkedIn and Spotify, who have valuations at 5 to 10 times their competitors because they take a relationship-based approach to the business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was so smart in the way that you approach that in inserting that word relationships. You know, I know James, our founder, was contributor to your book. You guys have some very like-minded approaches, and we talk about, you know, the long game of relationships internally with our team, and it's part of the reason he wanted to write his upcoming book. And one of the things that he keeps coming back to is asking people, name one thing in your life that is good that isn't a direct result of a relationship, except for maybe the weather, right? So when we look at relationships in that way, and we start looking at networking and connecting as part of the long game of relationships, not the one and done of typical transactional relationships, that I think is where we get that sleazy vibe when we don't like the word networking. I think that is really at the core of what we're talking about. So Michelle, for our audience of B2B sales and marketing professionals, what is your opinion on why it's so important for them to develop their skills and themselves as a connector?
People want to do business with people they like, right? We actually choose our vendors, our stores, our everything based on how it feels, the concept of mood memory. So it doesn't matter if you've got a better product. It doesn't matter if you have a better price. I want to do business with the person, and the person in the relationship wins. And so if you focus on building those relationships and those connections and following these mindsets of being open and accepting, having a clear vision of coming from a place of abundance. I mean, there's a lot of pieces in here, and having a spirit of generosity is one of the most critical ones, where it isn't always about your end game, but about their needs, their wants, and how to create value for them. It comes. It might not be linear. And that's a really important thing to remember. It isn't quid pro quo. It isn't reciprocity. It isn't I scratch your back, you scratch mine. It's I have a mindset and a philosophy of connection. And that enables these things to happen. Because I love what James said about trying to think about all the good things in your life and who you have to thank for them is a very similar way that I say it, because everything that's good, like every story I tell, I can tell you who it is, you know?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
If you think about your sales and your biggest clients and your most recent clients, well, who introduced you? Who recommended you? How did you meet them?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Some of those relationships, whether it's business or other things that have come great in your life, it is always the people that come to mind most and first when those memories come up. So one thing I wanted to touch on, Michelle, is you talk about in the book 7 levels of connectors and how to determine what type you are or where you are on this scale of the levels of connectors. Can you tell our audience a little bit about that? Some of the things that maybe they could be thinking about to determine where are they at on these levels that you unpack in the book?
Absolutely. And I'm actually developing a quiz right now for people to kind of figure out where they fall on the spectrum.
I love it.
So the spectrum starts with a non-connector. A non-connector is somebody who might not see the value in relationships, or they're really just very uncomfortable with it. There's very few people that are truly, truly non-connectors. And I would challenge their thinking around it. Most people are at least what I would call an emerging connector, where they infuse some of the behaviors, attributes, mindsets, but they're not doing it regularly. It's still not very comfortable. That's an emerging connector. And as we move up, we can go to a responsive connector. This is somebody who is willing and sees the value, but is really more reactive to requests than they are to initiate and generate the ideas of embodying these mindsets. In the kind of first grouping is the acting connector. The acting connector is doing it. They get it. They're doing it regularly. And so when we think about where do you fall, you usually fall within one of those four. And those are the ones that are very easy to move up. Mm-hmm. Then the question is an acting connector good enough? And for many people, it is. Not everyone needs to be a global super connector. When we think about what differentiates where you're on the spectrum, it's two things. One is whether you are responding or initiating the connector behaviors. So are you in a more responsive or reactive state, or are you more an initiator? And the second is the breadth and depth of your connections. So a niche connector is somebody who has a breadth and depth within either a geographic region or an industry or a job function. So like one narrow genre, if you want to call it that. So there's a woman in my town who knows everybody locally. She's a niche connector for our community.
Mm-hmm. Right.
My sister is very well known within the legal real estate market in New Jersey. So you can call them regional connectors, or if it's a geographic reach, or you can call them niche connectors if it's a different type of reach. For most people, that's the holy grail. You don't need more than that. Mm-hmm. My sister's not a global company. Her industry that she focuses on is not global. She does not need to be global. She's a niche connector. Mm-hmm. Yeah. A super connector is somebody who crosses those niche lines. So I know lots of people, breadth and depth, in lots of different industries or lots of different job titles or lots of different geographic regions. Mm-hmm. And then to take it to global super connector is obviously just to take it out of your area to the world.
Today's growth story is all about search engine marketing. The company we're highlighting is SentinelOne. This challenger cybersecurity brand was set out to disrupt the endpoint protection space. Their brand was top-notch, their product was innovative, but they were struggling to gain traction online in an already developed industry. Then they found Directive Consulting, a B2B search marketing agency. Within the first quarter of working with Directive, SentinelOne was able to increase their organic traffic by 128% and overall lead volume by an outstanding 251%. Now, I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
Yeah. I think you really hit on something there, Michelle. I think a lot of people do aim to be that niche connector, whether it's within their vertical industry or maybe, a horizontal market connecting within, across marketers or finance or, the legal industry vertically, a couple different ways or locally. But I think to me, the tipping point then is you can be of more value as a connector when you're not so narrowly focused, because then you can introduce someone who needs something else that's really not within your niche, but you can deliver value there. Is that where you see the biggest value in moving to that next level beyond the niche connector?
You hit the nail on the head. That is exactly it. And that's why the third part of the book actually talks about how to diversify and expand your connections and become an inclusive connector. Because we don't want to exclude people just because they are not from our area, they're not from our industry, they're not at our level, whatever it is. Because you don't know who they're married to or who their neighbor is or who they went to, camp with.
Right.
And when you have a real connection, that happens to me all the time. My second book was because my sister dated a guy in middle school.
Talk about a few degrees of separation.
Yeah, she ran into him and he happened to be the head of NBC's digital publishing arm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and she said, "Oh, my sister just wrote a book." And he said, "Oh, I need to talk to your sister." And 14 months after that first meeting, Heroes Get Hired was on the shelf.
Yeah, I love those sorts of stories. You never know where a connection is going to lead. So, Michelle, for people listening to this that agree that maybe are kind of identifying with some of the different levels we've unpacked there in the 7 different levels of connectors, and they want to move up, I think sharing a little bit on the mindsets of successful connectors that you touch on the book would be helpful for folks. What are some of the things that they can do, the mindsets that they can adopt to become a better connector?
Well, there's 7 mindsets, and within the book, in each chapter that has a mindset, there's mindset missions. And some great experts like James is giving you some tips on creative ways to connect within the book. So we have about 30 experts giving their expertise as well. The 7 mindsets are that connectors are open and accepting, have a clear vision, believe in abundance, trust, are social and curious, are conscientious, and have a generous spirit. Now, I know we don't have time to go into all of them, but as you think about them, what you might be able to recognize is that some enable others. They're not linear. I think it's always helpful to start with being open and accepting. And when we talk about that, we talk about not just being open to others and accepting of others, but accepting of ourselves and our unique charms and having a little more of that self-awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But
I mean, just anecdotally, as you ran through those, I'm thinking about, the generous spirit. I've shared the story with listeners here on the podcast before. I became part of our agency, Sweetfish Media, that's behind the show B2B Growth, in part because James was a connector with a generous spirit. I had been a fan of the podcast, had reached out to James to pick his brain about where he was in his entrepreneurial journey. And here I was in a different industry, in sales, in the copier office equipment industry, several states away. And he said, sure, we'll chat for 30 minutes. He was very generous with his time. That turned into a friendship, now turned into a working relationship that it never could have been seen if you were looking at that connection linearly, as you mentioned.
I love that. Right. And anytime I bring this up, I do keynotes and I'll ask people in the audience to share a story. And if they had to give their thank you speech, who do they have to thank? And it's amazing the stories that you hear.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, there can be so many different ways that those connections can happen. What are your thoughts? I think one thing, especially, for sales and marketing professionals, this belief in abundance sometimes might be tough as we look at our total addressable market and we're looking at, our fiercest competitors. A lot of our listeners are in, the sales tech or the MarTech space where there is just enormous amounts of competition. Where do you feel like people can make that shift even when they're in a competitive marketplace and everything around them is saying, I can't have this mindset of abundance where I'm not going to be successful?
Well, first of all, it's okay to acknowledge the fear. Scarcity is scary. And there is reason sometimes that people feel that way. And it's the idea of having a mindset of abundance is not that you have a Pollyanna attitude and you think everything's coming up roses and daffodils.
Sure.
It's more that even if something has been scarce. So for example, back in my finance days, there was only one female partner. So other women tended to be pretty not nice to other women because it was so scarce to elevate.
Right.
So there was very clear evidence that there was not an abundance of women at the top. That said, if you have a mindset of abundance, you have the belief that it doesn't always have to be that way. You are open to the possibility of there being more, of it being possible, of there being enough. And one of the things that we can do is not to judge ourselves in relation to other people. Jordan Harbinger actually contributed to this chapter and tells some stories. But when we are not judging ourselves in comparison to other people and when we're allowing others to shine, it gives us that freedom to not be desperate, right? Nobody wants the desperate salesman.
No, yes, I can tell you that from experience.
Right? If you're too hungry, it is a turnoff. But if you are okay ensuring that they get what they need, whether it's with you or not, that feels real good. And maybe you aren't the right person for that client, but they know the right client for you. And so that's how it happens. That's what we talk about with it being non-linear.
Mm-hmm.
So I say, give credit to others, make those referrals, make those introductions, even if it's within your competitor, because I don't believe in competition. I believe everyone's a strategic partner. And if we can, and that's the idea behind an abundant mindset.
I love the way that you tied that back to, real world examples of how it can be nonlinear. You never know what that connection is going to bring. I feel like we've said that several times, but it comes back to that mentality that looks beyond this conversation, this transaction, and looks at the long game, because relationships take time, and good things often do take time. We just get so short-sighted that we let that, put our blinders on. And what you said about the mindset of abundance, you just look at, even in the sales and marketing space, the pie may be this big right now. This is the addressable market for this type of solution, but that doesn't mean that innovation isn't going to make that pie bigger and open up new doors and new opportunities, even in a well-defined market. So I think what you're saying there definitely is going to resonate with a lot of listeners. Michelle, before we sign off today, is there any parting thoughts that you would leave to sales and marketing folks on this idea of being a connector, trying to adopt these mindsets and see if they can leverage being a better connector in their careers?
I would tell them that you're already doing it. Bring awareness and relationship focus, and then you'll be doing it more, because connectors get things done faster, easier, and better.
I love that. I love coming back to that, Michelle. Well, Michelle, if anybody listening to this would like to reach out to you, stay connected, or find a copy of your book, what's the best way for them to find you?
I would love to hear from all of you. The best place is to go to my website, which is Michelle, Michelle, Tillis, Tillis, Lederman, Lederman.com. From there, you can find my LinkedIn, my YouTube, my blog. I do little success shorty videos, quick little tips. You can connect me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, all those good things. My new book is theconnectorsadvantage.com. And if you go there, there's some pre-order bonuses and goodies and giveaways. Actually, anybody who's on my mail list on the day of launch, which is March 5th, will get a Kindle version for free. And so they can sign up right on my website.
I love it. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today. I love your thoughts on being a better connector. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Digital marketing agencies have a tough job. You have to stay on top of the latest marketing strategies for your clients and your agency. What if there was a way you could address both at the same time? Imagine your agency putting out content with greater quality and quantity. Envision bringing your clients a turnkey solution for one of B2B marketing's fastest growing media strategies, podcasting. You know, all those clients asking for your help with their account-based marketing efforts? Picture being the first to bring them the idea of content-based networking, showing them the proven strategy for breaking into their most coveted accounts. Here's the concept. Sweetfish Media is looking to work with a limited number of innovative agencies interested in a new partnership model. We produce a podcast for your agency. You introduce the power of podcasting and Sweetfish services to your clients. Everybody wins. Learn more at sweetfishpartners.com.